Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. So this week, joined by Finn Wilson and Jane Miller, formerly known as Impact Wales. Hi guys, great to have you here.
Yeah, formerly known, yeah, we're still here, but yeah, we are Impact Wales.
There's lots of overlap between listeners to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education and to your fantastic podcast as well.
Thank
So
you.
they'd be really interested to sort of get an insight into your thinking. And we're going to focus it around our conversation around An Illustrated Guide to Pedagogy, which is a book. Have you both written that, or is that just yours, Finn?
It's just mine, yeah. So I'm probably going to hog the questioning
are.
today, and Jane's going to come in with some examples, hopefully.
The thing is, you guys working so closely together, there's no way you can separate the.
No, we have just the one brain between us.
Admittedly, yours is slightly bigger than mine. There you go. Favorite share.
So I thought probably makes sense because we're probably looking at teachers who are novices or just developing their understanding of cognitive psychology, cognitive science, and sort of evidence-informed approaches to the teaching in primary generally. But what is pedagogy, and why is it important for teachers to understand what it is?
So pedagogy, in a nutshell, is the art and science of teaching. So it's not just what you teach, but it's how you teach and why you should be teaching that. And I think it's essential because it's the craft of teaching, how you actually do it and why you would do it that particular way. And I think it's really, really important for teachers to understand how they do their job, because the teaching is just so incredibly complex. It's one of the hardest jobs out there. I mean, when you think about what the job of teaching actually is, it is standing in front of maybe 30 plus children and young people and trying to change their minds all at the same time towards the same direction, and for that to last long term. I mean, that's incredibly difficult, and you will never fully understand how much of their minds you have actually changed. But that's essentially what teaching is. So to understand the elements of good teaching that results in good quality learning is essential. I think there's been too little discussion out there on what learning actually is and how teaching supports that, because the role of a teacher, the pedagogy that you use, is actually all about the learner. If it doesn't make a difference to the learner, it might be something really good, something that somebody has recommended to you or has come from research or whatever it is. But if it's not making a difference to how the learner is thinking and how that learner learns, then you shouldn't be using it. So the result of what you do isn't even in yourself, it's in the learners in front of you. So it's a really complex idea.
Absolutely. And obviously we've got, Peps McRae, I think he gets stick sometimes for talking about how it's more complex than brain surgery, because at least brain surgeons have the brains in front of them to work on, whereas we're trying to get inside
Yes.
the minds, aren't we?
Right, yeah, it's entirely abstract as well. You're never going to see fully the results of what you do.
Do you think there's a difference between the conversation in England and the conversation in Wales at the moment? Are teachers at the beginning of that conversation? And I should probably say Borda to all of our Welsh listeners, but is it fair to make that generalisation that this is a conversation that is sort of fledgling in nature on your side of Office Dyke?
I think I mean, you're asking us to understand what teachers in Wales think and feel. And I think that, you can only make a sweeping generalisation in that. And I think that there is conversation happening in Wales about how learning happens, how teaching should support that, and the science of learning and cognitive psychology and all of those kinds of things. But I think it's very patchy, would you say,
Yeah,
Jane?
I agree. I think we're still working with schools, you know, on the key ideas of, how learning happens, and it's that light bulb moment still for teachers at this point. So it's moving
Yeah.
in the right direction, but it is patchy, isn't it?
And I think one of the reasons why is because our curriculum at the moment doesn't actually specify anywhere the science of learning. There are sort of related documents that mention it, but it's not in the curriculum for Wales. and the current, just to get a little bit political, but the current leadership, educational leadership in Wales, political leadership, actually resists talking about some elements of teaching. I mean, there was a big argument in Wales over the last sort of year or so around the science of teaching reading, and the Education Cabinet Secretary Lynn Neagle actually resisted admitting that there was a right way and a less right way to teach reading. So yeah, it's very difficult in Wales, and I do feel that there's so much that teachers are missing out on when they're thinking about how to teach effectively, that they are working very, very hard, and there are easier, more effective ways to teach that we are not currently across Wales having that discussion about as much as we should.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I remember it must have been around about 2020. I saw someone publish what essentially was the Spanish version of David Didai's "What if everything you knew about school were wrong or was
Mhm.
wrong?" And so seeing it appeared that the conversation there was on a maybe 6, 7 year delay, because if that book was needed there in the same way we needed it here, it's really interesting, and it's really interesting to see sort of the north of Ireland moving. They've obviously got Lucy Crane over there, sort of supporting their curriculum review and things like that there. So it's just sweeping generalization to sort of help me understand the context of Welsh
Yes.
education
Yeah.
a bit more. Because obviously I know there'll be lots of teachers, Garth Rain in particular, who has been sort of spearheading how we learn sort of.
There are kind of people within Wales who are having to be, through necessity, really quite evangelical about the science of learning. I mean, we're probably some of those people, but there aren't enough kind of voices across the range talking about the same things, and there is still, unfortunately, an argument against what other countries know to be, extremely well supported in international research. There's still an argument against those things in Wales from some
And a
quarters.
resistance
Yeah,
in some cases.
Change is hard. Change is really, really hard, and it upsets some people's positions. So
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, I've always seen teaching as almost being intertwined with your personality. It's difficult to identify where the teacher stops and you begin, and
Yes.
vice versa. And so you it is easy to take it as an affront to you as a person. But
mm,
really, when we think about things, we've got to be really clinical in terms of, is what we're doing A,
Mm.
manageable? Can we do this on a day-to-day basis within a 45-hour working week, which is the TDAPE sort of mantra? And is it actually making a difference to our pupils? And there are lots of things that I've had to confront over the course of my career. But I think once you do, actually things are much better, both on a professional level and efficacy level, I think.
Yeah. I think it's also a difficult conversation for those teachers, and I'll put myself squarely in that bracket of who've been teaching a long time, long in the tooth, to actually go back and revisit some of your earlier teaching and your current teaching and think, did I actually get it right? Do I need to change the way that I approach things? But there are also things that you talk about, the science of learning, that you do, but you don't know why you do them and why they work. And it's having that realization, okay, I know this works. I'm an experienced teacher, and understanding the science of learning, understanding the why it works is a really powerful thing. And being able to choose when to do things and when not to do things,
mm.
based on the pupils in front of you, I think is, no matter how long you've been teaching in the classroom.
I just wanted to go back to your point, the idea of your teaching being partly who you are. And the reason that your teaching is so intrinsic to who you are is because your teaching is a product of your own thinking. And you are using your thinking to change your pupils' minds. And thinking is so complex, but there are ways to change it. But the ways to change your thinking have to be practiced again and again and again. And this is why it does feel so difficult, because people talk about, oh, well, it's just the way I do it, or, I'm not even aware that I'm doing it that way, because teaching is so complex that you kind of outsource some of your practice to habits, and you don't become aware of those habits.
Yeah.
And then you know, it's like you have a conversation, you say, well, you know, like, and you use fillers in that conversation, or you have a habit where, you know, you twist your hair when you talk, because that's subconscious. And I think people feel like, well, I'm not even really aware that I'm doing that, so how can you criticize me for that? But all of these small habits, I've worked on something that I do all of the time, and I'm trying not to, is I ask double and triple questions, because I'm a former English teacher. So I'm quite happy to keep on talking. And I've had to work very hard at asking a question. And even if I don't think it's quite the best way to say it after I've said it, I'll just let it sit there and see what happens and see what response comes back. And that is an active choice in my own thinking to change my practice. But yeah, it's that, which is why I said pedagogy is the art and the science of learning. It feels both unconscious and conscious at the same time.
Yeah, I think a big part of it can be seeing the alternatives in action. So obviously I'm going to say, whenever I visited St. Peter's in Cardiff, happy teachers, happy pupils, lots of learning taking place. Go and see it. I don't know, maybe if you guys had a list of schools you'd recommend people go see, maybe we can add it to the show notes for this, and then if anyone is
Yeah,
interested
yeah.
in taking a visit, because when you see things in action, you think, wow, this is the way things
Yeah.
could and should be. It's amazing. I'd like to take a little break from the episode for a second to think about the Thinking Deeply About Primary Education conference in Cardiff on September 27th, 2025. Now, one of the things that lots of people have been talking to me about is why it's on a Saturday. And I think there's a certain amount of ownership that Saturday conferences allow you, because if I'm there in my own time and I'm thinking about my professional development, I can choose to go to the sessions that suit me. And then obviously the aim is that the TDAPE conference, all of the conferences really, will have threads that anyone interested in primary education or even education in general can follow. And so that ownership, I think, is really, really important, because ultimately we're the ones who put the legwork in when it comes to our own professional development. And if we're interested, then we're going to be motivated, and we're going to feel success, and then we're going to be more motivated, and the virtuous cycle propels itself. Now, I actually asked regular contributor Shannon Doherty for an explanation as to why she goes to conferences on a Saturday during her weekends, and she said, "Where did you get this number from? Please stop messaging me. It's 2 o'clock in the morning." So, as you can see, pretty good reasons to go to TDAPE Cymru, 27th of September. We're going to have lots of great speakers: Christopher Sutt, Jamie Howe, Neil Allman, Shannon Doherty, Lloyd Williams-Jones, Elliot Morgan, all the regulars, and many, many more. Just keep an eye out on social media. So, without further ado, back to the episode. So, an illustrated guide to pedagogy, right? When I read it, I was very interested by the structure. Is it structured in a way that represents your ideal journey for teachers, or did you have something else in mind?
Okay, well, I should say that you are one of the few people who have actually read it, because it's not due out until December, so it's really quite early on. But the structure is set now. The structure is set up in such a way that it's foundational. It follows Ausubel's subsumption theory, in that foundational understanding information appears early on in the book, and as the book goes on, it gets more and more specific. So essentially, it's set up in the what you already know determines what you are able to learn. So, for example, you can't talk about cognitive load and how to manage cognitive load until you already understand that you process using the working memory, which is where the limitation comes from. In another way, you can't talk about how effective talk is for learning to be embedded until you understand schema theory. That schema theory, i.e., that all learning is connected, and that the number and the depth of the connections determines how well it is remembered long term, and that talk is a way to encourage those connections to be more fully embedded. So it's set up. It might seem less well connected than that, but it should follow through on, right, we looked at this in chapter 1, we're going to come back to it, and we're going to add more specificity in chapter 3, 4, and so on. So that was the way it was structured, is a kind of professional learning curriculum based on the hierarchy of the concepts involved.
I mean, that's genius. I don't know what you think, Jean, but
Well,
I
thank
sense
you very
something in
much for that. But I think the process is something that we have been doing over the last 10 years with teachers in schools. It's, you go into a school and you try to explain to people cognitive load theory and how it is important that they manage people's cognitive load, but they haven't really fully understood how the working memory works and the connections with the long-term memory. And you think, okay, so we need to go back and we need to do that. And it's been a sort of trial and error.
I mean, for example, we've been working this term with a secondary school in the valleys on a
Big
larger
project.
big project, but we've been working with two very subject specific areas.
Science and English.
Thank you. But we spent the first part of the time we were working with them making sure that everyone had that foundational knowledge of how learning happens before we then went into the more specifics of English and science. So it's making sure that everyone's really got that foundational understanding, because it makes it so much easier following on for them to think about how it's going to look like, what it's going to look like in English and in science.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that when I've been working with sort of new teachers in sort of the southeast of England, I can assume a lot more prior understanding, and I think that might be thanks to the early career framework and the sort of additions to ITT, where lots of that content is revisited several times before they get into the actual classroom. And obviously I'm not going to make sweeping statements about its efficacy, because I think there have been, there's a conversation going on about it in the background, but it that feels really sensible, because there are a lot of assumptions we make as teachers. The decisions we make will be based on assumptions that come from, like you say, cognitive science and those sort of foundational principles. And so, like I said, when I read the book, I thought there is something going on here. I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but like long-time listeners of Tadape will be familiar with Isabel, because Sarah Cotting had come on a while ago and talked all about her, her in action book and the work that she'd been doing. And I think we know so much about how people learn, because we say how learning happens. I think it's pretty much the same across adults and children. Maybe not the very, very youngest children, because we still got some biologically primary stuff going on. But in the main, I think the approach you've taken is really, really sensible, because it builds on what we know. So it's almost like this meta level that you're going at there. So hats off. I'm impressed.
The other thing is that I think there's an awful lot of information out there about cognitive science, about different pieces of research that should inform how we teach in a lesson. But I think there's less out there about the actual subject content of teaching, the subject content of pedagogy. And this isn't intended to be, the book isn't intended to be a, find out everything that you need to know about the Bjork and Bjork's desirable difficulties research. That's not the intention. The intention is make sure that you know all of the key principles, and each chapter actually has a principle to go with it that will inform where you might develop your expertise a little bit more. So it's essentially it's your sort of foundation degree in pedagogy, and you will want to delve into some of these areas in more depth and maybe go and look at other places for that. But there are so many teachers out there who are, it feels a little bit like how when you find a new app and you have to learn the app. I think most people have learned how to word process on Microsoft. They're all self-taught, and therefore you end up doing things like a roundabout way, because that's just the way that you discovered it. What I'm hoping this book will do is to actually show everybody the most efficient route, the most effective route, and so that you can start to compare that with your own practice and say, right, which of the bits of my own practice am I really good at? Am I know what I should be doing, and which bits maybe I'm less efficient and I can think about it in a slightly different way. And maybe which areas do I want to progress even further, and I'll need to go somewhere else for that. But it's that kind of, I'm hoping, which is why it's called a guide, is it's a really clear description of what everybody needs to know about pedagogy.
Yeah, and I think that's wise, because I think everyone's journey beyond that point is unique to them, because they'll read more of the Bjork's work on perhaps confidence weighted multiple choice questions and and the impact there, but not everyone's going to go in that direction. They may then go and look at cognitive load theory and some of the different effects, like for instance, the transient information effect, because then that influences how you sort of present information, that kind of thing. And so to create a book that went that deep into everything, I think it's probably a fool's errand. So I think what you've done is, you've given people the foundation upon which they can
Yeah,
grow.
and the other thing about the book that was really important is we know one of the most important things we know about learning is that learning is not a single moment in time. It happens over time, over repeated introductions or repeated retrieval, repeated practice. So it's a very, very practical book. There's lots and lots of worked examples, and we both feel that what a good one looks like is less effective than what a bad one looks like because there's less thinking involved. If you look at a good example, you can just go, yeah, well, I know it's a good example, and yep, there it is. Whereas where are you looking at what a bad example is, you have to find the bit that's gone wrong. So you have to think more deeply about it. So there's lots of what a bad one looks like tasks and practice tasks and examples of how you can go and develop it, because it's not intended to be taken on holiday and sat down and just read through and then put away. It's something that you should be working through and going back to and maybe discussing with your colleagues. It's very much a kind of professional guide to how pedagogy can be developed in your own practice, but also in your colleagues' practice as well.
I mean, it might be blindly obvious, but I think it does get missed quite a bit. Why is understanding the why so important?
Okay, so this is something that I have been thinking about in a little bit more depth recently. Is that why is related to Dr. Gary Klein's work on decision making, and he talks about mental models, and he talks about how important it is to have a clear representation in your mind of what it looks like, whatever concept that you're thinking about, what good looks like. And the reason for this is that so that you can compare what you're doing, what you see in front of you, with that mental model, so that you can start to recognize when things are going off track or when there's something happening that doesn't make sense. And I just wanted to give you an example from some of the work that we've been doing recently, that going back to the big project that we've been working on. One of the things that was coming up a lot was that teachers were saying that well, children are unmotivated, they've given up, they've switched off, they don't want to learn. And that doesn't make sense, because as a species, we are biologically predisposed to want to learn, because that's the success of ourselves as a species. We get a dopamine hit from fixing something or solving a problem or working something out. So that's how we have, developed. So it doesn't make sense that children don't want to learn. I'm kind of using air quotes there because they don't want to learn. There's something going on that is stopping them from doing the thing that we are set up as human beings to do. And what we have worked out is that for a lot of these young people, they have learned strategies to stop themselves having to experience failure. So they're being given tasks where they look at the task and they know they're going to fail. So they'll just chat to the person next to them, or they'll turn up slightly late, or they'll start to kick off. These are common strategies. And what we've recognized is it's not the child's fault. This is, again, fundamental attribution error, which is a cognitive bias. It's not somebody else's fault for the teacher. It's the teacher's responsibility, that these children have a barrier to their learning, that potentially the work is inaccessible to the learner. So what can the teacher do about it? And it's that mental model of, I know that learning is a normal, natural, and rewarded part of human behavior, and I know what the format is, so that when I'm teaching in a classroom, if I see something that doesn't fit that, there's a contradiction there, then I can start to question a little bit more. And I think that's one of the most difficult things that teachers are challenged by, is how to identify what's gone wrong. When you're teaching a class and you've got a group of boys at the back and they're kicking off, or they're chatting amongst themselves, or they're just not engaging, how do you know what the problem is? And that's why it's really important to know what it should look like so that you've got something to compare with. Because otherwise, that decision making process of what do I do now? What do I try next? So often we go into schools and they've correctly identified that there's something wrong, but they've incorrectly identified what it is. And then they spent a year working on that solution to the incorrect problem and can't work out why it hasn't worked, or they're blaming teachers for it not working, and the teachers are working really hard on that thing. So it's having a really clear mental model allows you to make much more effective decisions. And when you think about the challenge of being in a classroom, what a hot environment it is, everything's happening very quickly and there are lots and lots of variables. It is absolutely essential that you have this really crystal clear decision about or mental model about what it should look like, because you'll have to make those split decisions.
One of the things I want for my teachers, and when I'm working with teachers, is for them to be the most expert person in the room. Like in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about challenge and depth and
Yeah.
how that comes up in Eston and sort of conversations quite a bit. And obviously it comes up in Ofsted conversations too. And I always say to my teachers, like, when you're being inspected, you are the most expert primary teacher in that room because you're very rarely going to get someone with equal expertise. And having that confidence to say, I've made this decision for this reason, because
Yeah.
challenge is relative, and I probably should say this in a couple of weeks' time. Challenge is relative, and it's not a case of having three levels of challenge available in the tasks. It's about making expert decisions. Is that the kind of direction you push your teachers? Obviously, we don't do things for inspections, but if you're operating on that level, those kind of what can be quite intense situations become a whole lot easier because you have the not the arsenal, because that feels a bit combative, but you've got the tools to say, look, I've made this decision for this reason, and that's why we're going the direction we're going.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately we're in a situation where teachers and schools are having to argue their case in the inspection process. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be that the inspectorate has the same mental model of what good and effective and efficient teaching and learning looks like that teachers do. But unfortunately, they don't in Wales. I'm not sure what goes on in England, but they don't. So what we do a lot with schools is when we're working with schools, we're talking about making sure that learners make progress. So making sure that learners are learning. And that means sometimes doing things that aren't recognised by Eston as being really effective, but we're giving teachers the research background, the justification, the confidence to be able to say, no, we're making this decision because it's right for the learners in front of us, and we're willing to stand up and be disagreed with on that. And that is a really difficult thing to do. And especially when the stakes for the accountability are really, really hard, really high. But it is so important that at the bottom of this, or at the top of this, I should say, are the learners. If you're making a decision in your classroom, it has to be right for the learners, and that's what we're providing for teachers when we go out and support them. And I know that that's really difficult sometimes, isn't it?
And it does go back to what you said about the class teacher being the expert in the room. That teacher has worked with those pupils over up to
Years.
a year or longer. But and they understand where those pupils have come from and where they're going, but also what is needed for that child and those pupils now. And I think somebody coming in from outside hasn't got that picture. And I think it is a very difficult conversation to have, but it's throwing the or giving the power back to the teacher in the classroom to be able to say, no, I am doing this because this is the issue. This is what this child needs at the moment. So, and this is how we're going to help them make progress. But it goes back to what Finn said before about actually teachers being able to understand and know what the root cause of pupils not making progress is, not that superficial symptom that they see, but it's having the time and space to actually delve down deeply to find out really what is the one thing that's going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I think, I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm sort of thinking I'm unintentionally presented as if England are doing all these fantastic things. Wales needs to catch up, but that's not how it is. I mean, anyone who listens to the podcast now will know that we target our episodes at change on this side of the
Yes.
border as the other. And you know, you mentioned I don't know what it's like in terms of inspection. It's so subjective, you know,
Yes.
because even though we've
Yeah.
got that model there in writing in many different places, if
Yeah.
the inspectors have got a superficial understanding of that actual content, then you find yourself having to explain what
Yeah.
things actually mean and how that
Yeah.
actually looks in your context and
Yeah.
stuff. So yeah, so I should
But
probably
this is the point. It's about us supporting professionals to feel confident that they can stand in their truth and say, this is what is happening. And I know this because, and therefore that's what I'm doing next. Because what inspection is about, no matter where it happens, is the inspectors feeling confident that the school has a plan that's going to work, you know, and so that they can step away. And yes, it is a subjective process, and yes, it is imperfect. But if it enables teachers to think more carefully about, is what I'm doing good enough, then yeah.
So I thought it might be good to go into a few of the specific examples and some of the ones that caught my eye. Now, what is the drawing effect and why should teachers be aware of it?
Okay. So the drawing effect, I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you're aware, but this is something that I do all of the time. I create all Impact Wales sketch notes. So I draw my understanding of research papers. So I'll draw little stick men and set it out in a sort of graphic organizer way. And one of the research papers that I have done this to is Wham, Mead and Fernandez from 2016, called The Drawing Effect. And what they did in this particular piece of research is they had two conditions. They did actually look at lots of different conditions, but the two main conditions that I'm going to talk about, they gave participants some random words to work with. The first group, what they asked them to do is they asked them to carry out some semantic elaboration. So essentially what that is here's a word, horse. Think about the meaning of the word horse. Then they wanted to link the word with synonyms. So they'd be thinking horse, mule, donkey, and so on. Visualizing, so actually creating an image in their head of a horse and then finally writing it down. So that was the first condition. The second condition was simply to draw a picture of a horse. And when we do this, Jane and I do this, and she knows what I'm going to say now because we
Barry
do
the Blue Baboon.
Barry the Blue Baboon. Okay, so when we're doing this in support for schools, we say, right, what I want you to do is I want you to draw a picture of a blue baboon. And I just give you a little pause then to start the process going in your head. And what's happening, I can guarantee what anybody listening to this podcast now is thinking about. What you're doing is you're going through what you have available in your head for baboon. So you'd be going through, okay, baboon, is that like a gibbon? Does they have the little beard thing going on? Have they got sharp teeth? You know, is it macaque, monkey, chimpanzee? So you're sifting through and you'll do the same for blue. So aquamarine, dark blue, navy blue, you know, royal blue. And then the next step in the process is to create that mental image of the blue baboon. We like to call him Barry, sitting in your brain there. You know what he looks like. The final stage is to actually trace that picture out on the page. And those are three cognitive processes: cognitive elaboration, pictorial coding, and motoric coding. And each of those cognitive processes creates a set of connections, and they're interconnected, but also separately connected within their own connections. So one task, three sets of connections, interconnected connections. So three areas or three ways that you can get back at that information. Of course, the connections interact with each other as well, which increases the chances of you being able to retrieve information. It's not about the art. It's not about how good the picture is. It's about how well that information is remembered. So even though the first group in Wham, Mead and Fernandez experiment had actually carried out several different processes, the second group, because they were asked to draw, they actually retained more of the words in the long term. And I think drawing is, as an English teacher, I used to do it a lot. We used to do cartoon strips for plots of Macbeth and those kinds of things. But it's not just about drawing pictures, it's about any kind of graphic representation of language, because language is sequential. Language is, you have to remember the beginning of the sentence in order to make the sense of the whole sentence. Whereas anything graphic or visual is you see it all at once.
We've used it with quite a few schools when they're looking at numerical reasoning and problem solving, and to be able to get pupils to draw a picture of the text or the problem that they're working with enables them to make that much more progress and to understand a lot deeper as well the mathematics involved within it. Helps them make sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And when you're thinking about, you know, the process I go through to create a sketch note of a piece of research, I'm having to summarize the text, and summarizing the text is a really complex task. So I'm having to decode the words, I'm having to understand the words, I'm then having to identify the key or the main ideas and discard the rest. I then have to take those key main ideas and understand how they're related. Is it a hierarchy? Is it a flow? Is it a mind map? You know, what's the connection? I might then have to consider significance. What is more important than other things? So that level of processing, that's what you want for your pupils. You want them thinking as deeply about each piece of content as possible, which is why drawing seems really straightforward, can take a little bit longer. And I think when people try it initially, they think, oh, this takes ages, but it's well worth it because you then don't have to keep on coming back to those things because they've been learnt.
I mean, that's what's so interesting about it, is that we spend so much time thinking about how can we get pupils to attend to specific things. And what you've got here is attention focus, but also like the definition of bang for your buck in terms of, you know, if cognitive effects and the learning you want to take place. I mean, in my mind, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, okay, science and English, which one does it have? You know, is science easier? But part of me is thinking, does then science bridge into like the dual coding effect? I mean, what do you think about the relationship there? Should we try and keep those two ideas separate?
So the most important thing here is to consider, why are you using it? So there are so many different ways that you can use drawing. And as I say, it's not just drawing the picture, it is a graphical representation, so organizing information. So in mathematics, it might be sorting data into a table. Or in English, it might be draw a map of the plot of this story and map the people going through the map. But it's, I think, anything where there is less thought going on, then is what you're doing as effective as it could be. So you're right. If I said, right, okay, I want you to draw me a labeled diagram of the heart in science, that is really quite straightforward, and it might be less thoughtful than saying, okay, I want you to do me a flowchart of the journey of oxygen through the heart. You know, so it's thinking about, what's the purpose of the drawing here? What do I want pupils to think about? What is the concept that I'm asking them to create those three images over? I mean, you know, the drawing the blue baboon is just a really straightforward understanding of those three cognitive processes. But it's that having that mental model of drawing increases thinking. So what is it that I want them to think about? Therefore, what drawing am I going to ask them, or what graphical representation I'm going to ask them to do? I'm not sure I've answered your question there, but
No, you absolutely have, and it's really apparent this is something that you get better with through refinement. You know, because you can see, did they actually spend their attention where I wanted them to, or where I hoped they did, that kind of thing. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, if in 10 years I'm setting really effective tasks that draw on the drawing effect, then I'll be happy. But you know, you can try it tomorrow, but just reflect on it, see where you go.
common challenge of drawing for teachers is, and we've all had them, you know, that you say, right, we're going to do some drawing, and you have those girls who have those, and it might be boys who have those pencil cases, and they go, right, the felt tips come out, and then, you know, they're laid out neatly on the table, and they get ready to create something perfect. one of the ways of managing that, because some children will have an approach to drawing that will be rooted in what they expect from it, is to actually just use mini whiteboards and to say, you know, the drawing isn't important, it's the thinking. So it's transient. We're going to wipe it off as soon as you've done it. It's the process that goes on in your head that I'm more interested in than what you're drawing on the mini whiteboard. But that will limit pupils' need to get this perfect drawing that they'll compare with everybody else with. That's not the point of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, recently my 8-year-old came home and said he needed this set of coloring felt tips. And then his 10-year-old brother said they cost like £34. And well, no, you don't need them. You don't
Yeah,
need those.
yeah. Absolutely. What's wrong with just a pencil? Yeah.
He had seen someone with their process in school and go, oh, I need those. No.
Yeah.
They don't.
The next effect, I mean, it's sort of a loaded question because my business partner Stuart swears by this, and I like to prompt his thinking on things. But have you ever seen the Leitner flashcard method work in practice? And if so, what's the key to managing it?
Okay, so we use the Leitner flashcard method a lot with teachers, and they do use it, but we don't then go into the classroom and watch them use it, because we recognize that the observer effect, you change something just simply by watching it. So we prefer to be talking with the teachers about doing it. But the way that we suggest using it with teachers, and I'm thinking more primary than secondary, because things like phonics and new content, but it works just as well in both phases, is the day-to-day process. So you have one box which is every day, then you have one box which is Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then you have one box that is Fridays only. And according to whether you get the answer correct or not determines whether you move the card on to Tuesdays and Thursdays or Fridays only, or whether you move it back to every day. And I think the managing it is really easy in the moment, because you're asking the question. And if you use the principle, if you're asking it just to one person, then it's super simple. If you get it wrong, then you just keep it in the most frequent box. If you get it right, you move it on to the next box. If you're asking it of a class, I think one of the ways that is managing that, if you're using a question with the whole class, is you want 80% of that class to get it right before you can move it on, because you want to make sure that most of the class have got it before you're ready to move on to the next concept. But you'll also have to think about those who don't get it and don't get it right repeatedly. What are you doing for them? And it may be that they actually need their own individual Leitner method. And there's some brilliant apps out there where you can do that process on the apps. But it's you're both managing the class progress, but also individual progress.
I think it's also being very careful and being very selective on the content that you want pupils to remember. It's not about remembering everything that you ever taught them. It's about choosing the concepts and the key bits of information that you want your pupils to be able to recall really, really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, what's the point, for example, if my pupils have, I say to them, if I say, what's a simple sentence? And they'll say, verb, object, predicate, that kind of thing. No, what I want them to have understanding is, why is this a simple sentence? And that's not a simple sentence. So in fact, I might have in my Leitner flashcard method, I might have examples might be more effective, because it'll open up discussion of deep conceptual understanding rather than simple,
Yes.
It needs to have this, that, and the other.
When you describe it like that, it makes total sense. He sent me this overly complicated Google Calendar. So any accusatory sentiment was totally directed at him with this.
Oh, there you are. Well, we've given you hopefully evidence that you can go back to him and go, oh, actually, yes, I do get it. And this is this, yeah.
It's about playing with that space net in between, about how often and how long, how much of a space pupils need before they need to return back to that learning.
And this is one of the questions that we ask teachers all of the time, is that once they've realised that forgetting is an essential part of the learning process, and it's that kind of prioritization, deprioritization tool, you say, well, okay, so tell me, when's the best time to go back to something you previously learned? When should it be? And you'll invariably get, oh, well, every lesson or once a week, or, these nice, neat little things. And the best time to go back to content that you have previously been exposed to see if you've remembered it is at the point of maximal difficulty. And that's going to be different for every different person because it's just before you forget it. And what the Leitner flashcard method does is it allows you to play with that gap. So you'll go back and you'll say, right, I'm giving you 1 day's gap. You've remembered it. Great, I can move it on. Now I'm giving you 2 days gap. Right, you've still remembered it. And then 3 days and so on until you find the point where they haven't recalled it. And then you can shorten the gap again. And it just makes that process of finding the maximal point of difficulty for all of your pupils, it systemizes it. So it takes the onus off you trying to work it out, and it just hands it over to the system.
Yeah, so it's taking sort of Ebbinghaus's work and the new theory of disuse and saying here's a
Yeah.
structure in which you can sort of utilize what we know about.
Yes, we want to outsource as much of the efficiency of learning to something else so that we don't have to think about it, so we can focus on the really important points, like what am I going to teach next and who's got it or not.
The next question asks for one piece, but I reckon one each if possible. What's the one piece of research that you feel gets the least airtime in sort of general discourse, but you wish more teachers knew about and utilized?
Okay, so I'm going to go for Mandler's categorization theory, 1967. And the reason that I've gone for this is because it is described as effortless learning. And that's like the goal for everybody, isn't it? How can I learn something without even realizing that I'm actually learning it? And what Mandler did in this piece of research was he had a control group who he asked to memorize 52 random words on different cards. And then he had his experimental group where he gave the same 52 random words on cards. And all he asked them to do, he said, do not memorize them. I just want you to put them into categories. So just put them into whatever category you want. You make up the category. It can be between 2 or 7 different categories. And you can see where we're going with this is the group that have been asked to memorize it and have focused on that recalled or were able to recall fewer of the words than those who had just sorted. And I think that process of sorting, what that's showing you is that when you think about something, that is learning. So if you can support teachers if teachers can use tasks that enable pupils to categorize, so that's anything that rank, sort, match, odd one outs, any hierarchies, anything that allows you to go through the process of categorization, that is learning. But the pupil, it doesn't feel hard, it feels effortless, unlike a lot of the kind of the desirable difficulties, because you're focusing on the categorization rather than focusing on the kind of retention side of it.
I think my bit of research, though, is just to go back to what you've said, is about desirable difficulties and this idea that performance isn't necessarily learning. And I think as teachers we fall into that trap, that thinking just because something in a book looks great because pupils have done it doesn't mean they've learned it, because we've all taught those pupils that they could do it one lesson, you go back the next lesson and it's like you've never taught it, as if they weren't even in that lesson. And that idea of that learning is thinking, and it doesn't necessarily translate into what you see in the book and the performance, and it's about being able to make that difference between the two, that those pupils who you think haven't got it, you can't see it because it's invisible, they might actually have a better understanding than the pupils who've done and performed in a piece of work.
There you go.
Fantastic. How are you guys familiar with the idea of scoregami?
No.
So, I mean, I think the NFL is like over 100 years old, and there are a list of scores that have never happened. And
All right.
every time one happens, it's called a scoregami. So your paper, Finn, I think is a tadabigami, because after 240-ish episodes, I don't think anyone's mentioned that one. So that is
Oh, there you
that's
go.
no mean
Yay!
feat. That's because sometimes the popular ones come back time and time again. But I think you've done really well there, and I'm definitely going to go and check it out and try and push that as much as possible.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
So I mean, it has been absolutely fascinating talking with you guys about all things pedagogy and getting into some of the minutiae. We're going to be together on September 27th
We
in
are.
the Peters Cardiff for the Thinking Deeply About Primary Education conference, Cymru. Um, all the funds raised are going to be donated to the Valinder Cancer Centre, which is sort of close to
Yeah.
Cardiff, close to the Happy Family Heart. Finn, you're going to be speaking at it. What are you going to be speaking about?
Well, everything to do with thinking and learning and how the science of learning is really, really essential. So lots of the things that we've talked about today, but in a little bit more detail and a little bit more sort of a practical approach, because I don't like to come along and just speak. I want to come along and I want my audience to be doing the thinking. So it is going to be a very, very practical session.
Fantastic. I mean, that's totally on brand with the structure of the book and the meta sort of levels that you're approaching this. That's going to be fantastic. And I think in general, the day is going to be a day where we can learn from like-minded colleagues. I think the vast majority, we always aim for the vast majority of speakers to be practicing teachers, talking about their experiences, really pushing for Welsh teachers in particular to be there and speaking as well. But then, no matter what element of education you're interested in, there will be someone, and we're very grateful to have you guys join us on that day. So all that's left to do is say thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Kieran. It's been fab talking to you too.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.